On March 30th, demonstrators gathered outside the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C., calling on the U.S. Congress to pass the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention and Human Rights Protection Acts. This legislation would ban the import of products alleged to be made from forced labor in China. It also authorizes President Biden to sanction anyone believed to be responsible for labor trafficking. Despite their tiny numbers, these protesters have a powerful force backing them, the U.S. government. Several of them are funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, an ostensible non-governmental organization which itself is funded by Congress. Over the last 2 decades, through the NED, the U.S. government has poured millions of dollars into a network of organizations advocating for a neo-Ottoman separatist state in China's Xinjiang province, what they call East Turkestan. Indeed, these Uyghur exiles pose as grassroots activists attempting to pressure the very same Congress that is funding their activities. Among them, Rushan Abbas.
The Chinese regime is waging a war against humanity, against the basic rights God has given to us, and waging a war against our ethnicity and our religion.
Her profile, now scrubbed from the internet, boasts of extensive experience working with U.S. government agencies, including Homeland Security, Department of Defense, Department of State, Department of Justice, and various U.S. intelligence agencies. Most famously, she worked as a translator for Uyghur detainees at the notorious Guantanamo Bay detention camp. Abbas also worked at Radio Free Asia, what the New York Times described as a worldwide propaganda network built by the CIA. Today, she heads the Campaign for Uyghurs, an organization funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. Also in attendance was Elfidar Iltabir, secretary of the Uyghur American Association. This is a subsidiary of the World Uyghur Congress, the main NED-funded organ of the separatist movement. The NED has granted millions of dollars to the World Uyghur Congress since its founding and gave it the Democracy Award in 2019.
As the world has witnessed in the last decade, Chinese communists, instead of respecting one's religious beliefs and embracing the democracy, instead CCP become more racist, fascist, and tyrannical.
Days before the rally, Iltabir took part in a Uyghur caravan denouncing a Stop Asian Hate rally. Fellow caravan participants shouted obscenities at the protesters. The director of the Uyghur American Association is Kuzat Altai. An investigation by Ajit Singh published in the Gray Zone revealed that Kuzat Altai and his brother Farouk have been trained by a former U.S. Army Ranger as part of a Uyghur militia called Altai Defense. Elfidar Iltabir's sister is Elnagar Iltabir, who in 2019 was appointed to be the Trump administration's director for China at the National Security Council. I asked Abbas and Iltabir about the allegations of a Uyghur genocide.
More than 3 million Uyghurs are taken to concentration camps.
So according to State Department, 2 million, and then Pentagon, 3 million Uyghurs. We believe it's more than 3 million Uyghurs are in concentration camps in East Turkestan.
On Mike Pompeo's last day heading Donald Trump's State Department, he published a report accusing China of genocide and claiming more than 1 million civilians are in concentration camps and likening them to the Nazi Holocaust. Pompeo directly referenced Adrian Zenz, the evangelical Christian fundamentalist whose claims of forced sterilization and labor, the basis of the genocide label, have been discredited as the product of data abuse and outright fraud. In May 2020, several months before Pompeo's genocide claim, then Assistant Secretary of Defense for Indo-Pacific Security Affairs Randall Shriver suggested the number was much higher, though offered no evidence.
The detention camps, given what we understand to be the magnitude of the detention, at least 1 million, but likely closer to 3 million citizens.
I asked how many people have died in the alleged concentration camps.
It's hard to tell because the numbers China given is never, trustworthy. So, according to the camp survivor Mihrigul Tursun, when she was in the camp for 3 months, 9 out of 60 detainees were dead.
Mihrigul Tursun is a Uyghur whose claims have been central to the genocide narrative and has been featured in the CIA cutout National Endowment for Democracy's promotional videos. She was the central witness in a Congressional Executive Committee on China hearing chaired by the neoconservative Senator Marco Rubio. The very same Marco Rubio who, in 2016, denounced then-President Obama's visit to a mosque, accusing him of dividing and pitting people against each other. At the hearing, Mihrugul Tursun claimed to have had her head shaved, been tortured, and nearly killed in an electric chair, and witnessed deaths of fellow inmates.
People dies among us, and then I have witnessed 9 people to die in front of me.
Harrowing testimony, to be sure, but is it factual? Well, it's hard to say. But the Chinese state media outlet CGTN caught Mihrugul Tursun lying to CNN about the death of her son.
Mihrugul says police jailed and interrogated her for the next 3 months. The day of her release, she went to the children's hospital in Urumqi to see her infants.
Mening cho'ng nevrem Muazza hazır Mısır'da yaşayatıdı. Kızım 2016-yılı 7 ayda Mısır'dan kelgen vaqtida elip kiptiken. Bu resim hazır Mısır'da kishi o'g'limning ochisi Samar mabalni beqatıdı. Mısır'da ba mabal hazır.
With evidence proving that Mihrugul's children are alive, the questions are, why would she lie to CNN, and how did she end up telling these lies at a U.S. congressional hearing?
So the claim of Uyghurs being killed comes down to the testimony of one person whose own mother revealed to be a liar. If Mihrugul Tursun is lying, it wouldn't be the first time the US government would have a sympathetic character give teary-eyed but false testimony in order to justify military aggression.
While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators. Took the incubators and left the children to die on the cold floor.
That testimony, of course, turned out to be a lie, cooked up by a member of Congress and a PR firm. Back at the rally, Rushan Abbas couldn't cite any actual figures, but insisted Uyghurs are being killed en masse.
We may not know that there's going to be like tens of thousands of dead bodies somewhere or gas chambers are happening, but everything that the Chinese government's doing in our homeland is exterminating the Uyghur people and killing the Uyghurs, basically.
Both Abbas and Iltabir also claimed that China has constructed crematoriums next to concentration camps, evoking imagery of the Nazi Holocaust.
Also, China built crematorias around the camps.
Crematorias are built next to it, next to those concentration camps, for a culture that doesn't practice cremation. Right there, that should give a warning signal.
But unlike the Nazi death camps, there is no evidence of Chinese crematoriums. Instead, there are a handful of articles from the US propaganda organ Radio Free Asia, where Abbas used to work. This Radio Free Asia article about crematoriums references claims to have aerial photos delivered by the Uyghur Transitional Justice Database, a Norway-based organization that is also funded by the National Endowment for Democracy. Yet the supposed photos of the alleged crematoriums are not provided. Instead, the article contains a blurry image of what it claims is an internment camp provided by serial fabulist Adrian Zenz, and says, quote, "There might be a cremation site near the camps." The Radio Free Asia article also references a previous article that alleges the regional government listed tenders for contractors to build 9, quote, burial management centers that include crematoria. A native Mandarin speaker searched the website of the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps and found nothing corroborating this claim. The same report claims the existence of a job posting listed on the Xinjiang official government website seeking 50 security personnel to work in a crematorium. There is no link to the job posting, a screenshot of any kind, or evidence of this job posting. And again, research by a native Mandarin speaker came up empty. It is, however, true that the Chinese government mandates cremation. Except this only applies to the ethnic Han majority. Ethnic minorities, including Uyghurs, are exempt. This 2003 document explains the policy, citing respect for customs of ethnic minorities and instead allots them land for cemeteries. In fact, the cover photo of the first Radio Free Asia article shows a newly constructed and weatherproof Uyghur cemetery in Xinjiang. The traditional form of dirt burials had left them vulnerable to the elements.
Yağmur yağan çağda şu kesaklı uçurulup düşüp gitip bağan. Yağmur yağıp şamal çıkan berip top apırıp şu tüyüşünü kujuttuk, işli atıp gitpagan, müyüşülküs gitpagan, maşındaq külün köygen Nimlos talep qilib maş yerni saldı sabbədi partiya hökumət rəhbərlikdə biz naydı bə xoş maşdaq ölkəni maşdaq çiraylıq yer yatqızğanğa. Mən razılığımız bilan şundaq talep qilib köçürüb əkeldik. Razılığımız şundaq bilan yatdı mənə şundaq belə xatırcam əmdi. Şundaq çiraylıq olub yerdə yaz gün güllük qilib başasını.
Those Radio Free Asia articles were authored by Uyghur exile Gulchera Hoja. In 2019, Hoja and Tursun were photographed proudly shaking hands with former CIA director and then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. At the rally, I asked Eltafir what she thought about the US government's treatment of Muslims. Do you think, Mike Pompeo and Antony Blinken are good allies to Muslims?
I believe so. They do have strong beliefs, which we see, and they do stand up for, human rights. And I believe they are indeed, from the heart, cares about humanity.
Iltabir assured me that despite the US-sponsored catastrophes in Muslim-majority countries like Yemen, Syria, and Palestine, the US is actually taking care of their rights, and they should simply lobby congressional lawmakers like Uyghurs have.
I'm sure US did enough to, for their rights. Because I'm in Uyghur, diaspora, I read more about those, so I may not have enough information to make a comment on that. But I would recommend those from Yemen and others to, get together and do advocacy work and inform the Congress, inform the Senate, inform the government officials about what's going on, and they will, if they know enough, I think they will take an action. So what I suggest is for other, Muslim countries to just keep, doing the advocacy work, lobbying, and
same with the Palestinians, for example, do you think?
And reach out for help from other groups too.
Would you call what's happening to the Palestinians a genocide?
As I said, because I don't have enough information, I'm not up to date with what's going on, I'm not the right person to make that comment.
When I asked Rushan Abbas why the US is supposedly interested in the rights of Uyghurs while committing atrocities in Muslim-majority countries, she assured me that the US is taking steps to ensure their rights. Why does the US care about human rights for the Uyghur people, but not about the Yemeni people, not about Palestinians?
I'm sure that they have, other projects funding and supporting to end those atrocities as well.
She also warned that China is seeking to imprison the entire world in concentration camps.
Look at the Uyghur people today and imagine the future of the free democratic world, because that's what Chinese government wants. If they win over the Uyghurs or win over the people criticizing the Western countries or this and that, and they let us concentrate on something else and get away with what they are doing, then will be the darkness of what the Uyghurs are facing, will be the future of the entire world.
Finally, Abbas lashed out at Daniel Dumbrell, a Canadian vlogger based in China who she accuses of making money from the Chinese government.
They are very actively using the social media, using those famous YouTubers to spreading disinformation and the false narratives. And they are trying to...
Who are these people?
There is a guy, Daniel Dumbrell, supposed to be Canadian, living in Shenzhen, making money from the Chinese government. He has a brewing company. Well, he has a company in Shenzhen, supported by the Chinese regime, because the Chinese regime is always advertising his brewing company in state-owned media. He accuses me getting paid from the US government or CIA, but I'm not going to do what he's doing because I don't have evidence.
But Rushan Abbas has long been on the payroll of the US government and continues to be funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, a fact she didn't deny when I had brought it up earlier in our interview. What do you say to criticism about the funding that you've gotten and still get from the US government?
Because US care about the human rights for the Uyghur people.
While Abbas acknowledges that she doesn't have evidence that Daniel Dumbrell is paid by the Chinese government, she insisted on portraying him as its beneficiary.
One thing you should think, if he can use YouTube and the Twitters and the social media, which none of the other people who are living in China can use. If he has a brewing company being supported and advertised by the Chinese regime, what do you say?
I contacted Daniel Dumbrill, who denied Rushan Abbas's allegation that the Chinese government affords him special internet privileges and that Chinese media runs advertisements for his business.
I don't think Rushan truly believes the millions of people accessing Western social media from China don't know how to use a VPN and their only option is to do favors for the Chinese government. As for her other claim, I actually made a special note that if any media outlet came to interview me about my politics or vlogging, that they not mention my business. I didn't want to conflate the two. Ironically, it's my critics that speak about my business more than I do, and this is a really good opportunity. Ask Rushan to provide any evidence for this claim, and you'll find, like many of her other claims, there's just nothing there to back it up, because it's simply not true.
I asked Abbas for evidence, but she declined to provide it, saying she is, quote, not interested in anything he had to say. Yet it wasn't only Uyghur separatist figures linked to intelligence agencies at the rally. Nihad Awad, the executive director of the Council on American-Islamic Relations, attended too.
We asked the Biden administration to fulfill its promise to put human rights on the top of their agenda.
While on one hand defending the civil rights of Muslim Americans and refugees targeted by the US government in the post-9/11 era, CAIR has also been a key proponent of destructive US wars in the Middle East and North Africa. In 2011, CAIR backed the Obama administration's decision to launch a NATO regime change war on Libya, which plunged the country into chaos and brought open-air slave markets back to the African continent. In 2015, CAIR supported the US dirty war on Syria, calling for a no-fly zone, a euphemism for the US to shoot down Syrian and Russian military aircraft.
As an American citizen, as an American Muslim citizen, I asked the Obama administration and Congress to work with key allies to establish one or more than one no-fly zone to protect the Syrian population.
CAIR has called on its membership to pressure Congress to pass the so-called Caesar Act, the most crippling sanctions on Syria to date. These sanctions have criminalized international aid, created severe energy shortages, and caused a devastating famine. According to Foreign Policy magazine, it has brought starvation, darkness, plague, misery, robbery, kidnappings, and the destruction of a nation. Now, under the guise of humanitarianism, CAIR is throwing its weight behind the US's new Cold War against China. Dr. Talibi Sharif, the Imam and president of Washington, D.C.'s historic Masjid Muhammad Mosque, attended too.
We are asking that America, its government, its president, its leaders put pressure on China to treat every one of their citizens as the creation of Almighty God, the Creator, as has been identified in the precious document that establishes this country, this Declaration of Independence.
Imam Sharif told me that Congress passing this legislation targeting China would be a sign of the U.S. living up to the ideals expressed in its founding documents, and he seemed to suggest the U.S. should take military action.
If the U.S., for example, recognizes this Uyghur genocide and advances legislation to challenge it, do you think that will be a sign that the U.S. is advancing towards a more harmonious, racially tolerant atmosphere?
Absolutely will be a sign. And it's the least they should be able to do. It's much more we can do. Again, I served in the military for over 30 years, so I know they have different instruments of power.
But the genocide narrative was the project of former CIA Director and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, one of the most extreme Islamophobes in U.S. politics. After the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing, Pompeo remarked that silence has made these Islamic leaders across America potentially complicit in these acts. Pompeo has accepted awards from the hate group Act for America, whose founder, Bridget Gabrielle, said that an American Muslim cannot be a loyal citizen, and that Islam is the, quote, real enemy. But for Imam Sharif, Pompeo's last-day genocide designation wasn't an attempt to irreversibly ramp up aggression with China, but a sign of a genuine change of heart.
Why do you think someone like Mike Pompeo, who's widely considered an Islamophobe, is so serious about this issue?
Well, I think some of that had to do with some sense of consciousness. To just speak the truth, he was on his way out, and he knew he was on his way out. Because we got to look at the whole time he was in terms of how he addressed it. And this is a short period of time. And for him, I think in terms of consequences to him, were inconsequential for him to make that statement at that particular time, even though it goes against the interests of the one that he was representing. That's why I think he said it. But again, I do see him as one who represents that right extremist population.
Right. So you think just on this issue, kind of at the end, he kind of came to his senses and said, I'm going to be in solidarity with these people?
I do.
With little pushback, the Uyghur issue is the central component of a bipartisan push to weaken and divide China, and is now at the top of Washington's foreign policy agenda.